Okay, this is the second story that I am only making this video for Cehbeach because he thought that this would be a video that a lot of people would want to hear me talk about this. Blah, blah, blah. Anyways, when I went to basic training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, otherwise known as Relaxin' Jackson, where we had co-ed basic training, and everyone pretty much knew that they were going to a position in the Army that was not going to be on the front lines. It was in the rear with the gear. That's the way that Fort Jackson is run. Basically, anyone who has a more infantry type position, they go to a completely different basic training. Some of their basic trainings are actually integrated in with their AIT training later, where it's in the same place, and so while I was at Relaxin' Jackson, every weekend we were allowed to go to religious services. Sunday, we were allowed to go. On Saturday, there would be training. So if you were a Jew, fuck you. All right? But on Sunday, we would have a day where we could choose to go to a off-post church service. And there were plenty of religions that wanted to have soldiers come to their church. One of which was the Mormon Church. Now, this wasn't my first experience with the Mormon Church. I was completely indoctrinated against them by Baptist and Methodist Church youth groups that had played movies like the God Delusion. And when I was 18, before I left to join the Army, I had actually tried to join the Mormon Church with my friend Dan, because we thought that their women that were the same age as us were better kept than the women of other churches. And we thought that their hotties were hot, and we were willing to try joining their church. And I think that we got looked down upon when we tried to join their church. This is before I was in the Army. But we got looked down upon because we didn't come with a family. Like, go start a family first and bring them there. Don't go to their church and try to become part of their family. We were looked at as, like, degenerates. We probably were degenerates, But that was my impression of the Mormon Church. We were outsiders. And then I joined the Army, and all of a sudden, the Mormon Church is wanting, soldiers that are single, which I heard one week, very early while I was there, that the bus that would take you off post in order to go to an off post service played the radio. And I was a very big fan of rock music, and they said that, they were playing rock music on the bus going towards the Mormon church service, and that's all I needed. And that's a really horrible reason to decide to go to church, but also there was, if you did not go to any service on Sunday and you were in the barracks doing nothing, you were at risk of what I and other soldiers like to call hey you duty, where the drill sergeant needs something done, like a floor needs to be mopped and buffed and waxed and buffed, or he needs he's gotten a call from some first sergeant somewhere, so he needs a group of people to go out and move a storage shed by picking it up, you know, by hand and moving it across a yard and setting it down, and then everyone piles back into the Humvee and gets taken back to the barracks. This is personal experience here. This is what hey you duties are. All sorts of hey you duties can happen, or just a drunk sergeant can go through the barracks and start dropping soldiers for push-ups. It happens. And you just don't want to be around the barracks in that environment if you don't have to be, you know. And most of the time, if you don't have a good reason, especially in your early weeks of training, if you don't have a good reason for not being in the barracks, you know, when you're not training, you don't get to leave the barracks, even though all you can do is sit there and polish your boots and read your training guide that they give you. They call it the Smart Book. Anyways, I had motivation to not be in the barracks, both because I was avoiding hey you duty, and there's no music. They don't, when you're in basic training, they don't give you any allowance to have any sort of music whatsoever. No headset. When I went, it was before anyone had any sort of cell phone that would have had music on it. That was, I guess I'm old, because that technology came out after I went through basic training. But I don't imagine that they allow cell phones in basic training. There was no way for me to get to any sort of music. So when I heard that there was music on that bus, that just put me over the edge of wanting to go on that particular bus. Now, you could choose to go to a service on post. They did have a Catholic service that was being run on post, but I was like, an hour-long bus ride out to their church, and that whole hour you get to listen to music, So I went. And I gave them information during basically they had a special soldier introduction to Mormonism type class, and you fill out some paperwork while you're there, and you don't think that anything's going to come of it, but whichever post that you end up as your regular duty station, another soldier who is part of the Mormon Church will end up knocking on your door if you went to the Mormon Church during basic training. They will, follow up on that initial interest that you had in their church. And that did happen to me. When I made it to my first duty station, somehow they matched up my name to having gone through basic training, and they were able to send me out some VHS tapes and my own copy of the Book of Mormon, and they had some guys knock on my door. But they were not actually the most pushy. The most pushy that I had at my first duty station, which was Fort Lewis, Washington. The most pushy were the New Testament Christian Church. And I don't see this church anywhere but outside of military installations, which is kind of scary. But while I was at Fort Lewis, my first run-in with them was I was walking between the barracks and the PX, the post exchange, right? And it was about a 2-mile walk. And I had no car. I had just gotten out of training where I wasn't allowed to have a car, So I'm walking to the PX, and a guy offers me a ride to the PX, and hitchhiking while you're on post between soldiers is a lot more common than hitchhiking off post, because you see the military haircut and you just know that you can trust them a little bit more than the normal person. If they're on post and they're walking towards the PX or walking towards off post, towards the gate, you can pretty much figure that they're not going to stab you. They just need a ride. But I got offered a lift to the PX, and the guy offered me. He invited me to a spaghetti dinner while we were driving, and this spaghetti dinner was something thrown by soldiers, he said. And I didn't know anyone that on post at the time, but I was like, that's all right. I got something to do tomorrow. I get back to the barracks, and I tell my friends, in the barracks, those that I had already met, about what happened, and they're like, "Don't go, don't go. It's a trap. It's a trap." And I was curious, like, why not go to the spaghetti dinner? And then they told me that the New Testament Christian Church does that spaghetti dinner every Sunday in order to attract new members into their cult. And, if they had never told me that, I never would have gone. But having heard that, I was interested, actually, in seeing what was going on there. And so the next time I got offered a ride, I actually accepted the invitation to the spaghetti dinner. Now, I told the guy that I didn't have a car to get out to it, but he's like, "Oh, that's okay. We'll come pick you up." And so I give him my barracks room number and everything. And sure enough, the next Sunday, he came to pick me up. And I went to the New Testament Christian Church right outside of Fort Lewis in Lakewood. And when I was there were 3 buildings to this church, and one of them was a barracks. And they had been collecting soldiers to live in very cramped quarters, just like when you're in basic training. Not like when you're in the regular army in real barracks, but like cramped quarters barracks. They like stripped down of no amenities. They had been recruiting Christian single soldiers to live in their building, and somehow they had the connections on post in order to be able to get these soldiers basic allowance for housing. Now, normally that BAH payment is not something that you qualify for until you reach at least E5, or at least that was the case when I was in the Army, the rank of sergeant. Or in some cases, you can get BAH and live off post if you are married. Most people who are married in the Army would prefer to have on-base housing, but in lieu of that, they sometimes put them off post and give them BAH. Well, there were a lot of lower enlisted soldiers that were in this cult, okay? Soldiers that had not even made specialists. They were private, okay? And somehow they were getting approved for this housing, and it was some sort of religious exemption to the normal housing rules, where all they had to do was explain that they wanted to join this cult. So I went to the spaghetti dinner, and other than people not using as many swear words as me and actually correcting me when I used them, I enjoyed the spaghetti and the garlic bread and the conversation, even though they were a little, uppity and uptight. Then I went to a service with their church. And in this service, it was explained that women should not wear pants. Women need to be wearing dresses. And I thought that this was strange, and I looked around, and the entire congregation was made up of single soldiers. There were no women, for the most part, in the crowd. There were a few in the choir, but the preacher was saying that it was an abomination unto God for women to dress up like men, and I believe it's Deuteronomy 22:5, could be 25. Anyways, it's a rule that it's one of those Old Testament just archaic laws where girls can't cut their hair to look like guys, they're not supposed to wear the same clothing as guys, no transvestitism, none of that, because it's not pleasing to God. Girls are supposed to look like girls and guys are supposed to look like guys, even though, supposedly God made men with nipples. What are we supposed to use them for? And he made, men with the ability to grow long hair, and he gave some women the ability to grow beards better than I can grow them, But, girls are supposed to look like girls and guys are supposed to look like guys. Anyways, the same preacher said some other things like those of us who still lived in the barracks should go back to our barracks rooms and take our TVs and throw them out. Because television was a portal for Satan to come into our lives. That all television shows, even the game shows, were just they were the makings of idle minds, and idle minds. There's a Bible verse about that. So in my head, when he said that, I was like, oh, that's because you don't want them to listen to any other input for information other than you, Mr. Preacher Man. And I was just completely wowed by my investigation of this cult. And that they are allowed to exist and keep existing in this parasitic manner on, soldiers. They're if it were not for the unique relationship that they're having with soldiers, giving them, money and living in that communal fashion, they wouldn't exist. And I was told by other soldiers that had actually been at other places like Fort Bragg and Fort Hood that the same thing goes on there. There's an Air Force base in Texas. Oh, I forget the name of it. It's right next to Tyler, Texas, where my friend Greeno lives. He says that they're there as well, and I've seen them here in Colorado Springs. And they draw soldiers and airmen from from Fort Carson, from the Air Force Academy, from Schriever. It really disturbs me that there is a dominionist element that only has churches where there are military bases. that their particular form of Christianity does not exist anywhere with a physical building that is not next to a military installation. It really disturbs me that they would only be seeking to get military influence. Now, it might be because it's easier to exploit the military system in order to exploit that BAH. I've seen all sorts of things where former soldiers, former high-ranking soldiers had left, had retired and then figured out a way to still milk the system. One of which was a call center that was set up in a rented out room of the MRF, the Military Recreational Facility on Fort Lewis. Basically, this call center was being run by ex-command sergeant majors, and they were selling phone cards to single soldiers in order to use their little phone booths that they had lining the walls, so that they could call back home, because a lot of these soldiers had no phone in their rooms, because this was back before cell phones were very popular. And these command sergeant majors were making money hand over fist selling these phone cards. And they were selling them at a slightly better rate than the post exchange would sell you a phone card from AT&T. They were getting all of those weird foreign phone card deals. But the New Testament Christian church, they don't leave you alone if you try to leave them. And it was my experience that unless you get blatantly scary satanic, like in my case, I actually was playing on my guitar and cartoonishly making my voice sound like the Cookie Monster in order to say, I hate God, Satan is king, just to scare this guy away, because he would keep on knocking on my door like every Sunday. Hey man, you want to go to church? It's like, no, I tried your church, didn't like it. And so he would try again and again, until I had to actually, make him know on no uncertain level, make him really know that I did not want to go. And I just feel like if anyone that was trapped in their cult, that maybe had gone to them, on one post, if they, were trying to leave them but didn't have that strength of will to get out of it. Sometimes it's about the friendships that you've made there, the peer pressure, but sometimes it's other things. Weak-willed people that instead of leaving a church, they'll use their PCS, their transfer from one post to another. They'll tell them, okay, well, this is the last week I'm coming to this church because I'm leaving. I'm going to be stationed on the other side of the country, and then maybe they wouldn't go to a church anymore. Maybe they'd use that as their opportunity to quit. And with this particular church, I felt like there was a network in place where there was not a base that you could go to in order to leave their reach. This is kind of a scary thing to me.